Hi, welcome everyone to today's episode of the Leadership Adventure. Today I'm with Melissa Fortunato. She was an FBI special agent and crisis negotiator. Today she brings that same experience to the corporate world, teaching professionals how to navigate conflict, build trust, and influence under pressure. She's also the managing director at the Negotiations Collective. Welcome, Melissa. I'm really thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kasha. I'm excited to be here with you and looking forward to our conversation.
There are so many questions that come to my mind when I think about the work that you've done. But the first one that popped into my head was really, wanting to understand what was the hardest thing for you being in these high stakes situations as a negotiator, knowing how much was on the line?
Yes. There were a lot of things that were going on at once. And so probably the hardest thing, if I had to pick one, is really learning how to manage myself and my brain being scattered in different directions, conflicting interests, and kind of allowing that stress to take over. And so that was the biggest thing, was really to keep myself calm, because I find when you're able to do that, you're able to communicate it better, people feel it, and it can lessen the crisis part of it, and then get you to the point that you can actually move forward with having a really productive conversation and negotiations.
And what were, the longest negotiations that you've been a part of? Because my understanding is that sometimes this really takes, hours, days, even longer, weeks.
That's very true. It depends on what the situation was. We one time worked on a kidnap for ransom case that went 56 days. So there was an American citizen who was kidnapped by the Taliban, and he was held in a cave in Afghanistan by the Taliban as they were contacting his family for a ransom payment. And so we would spend, days with the family waiting for phone calls to come in. As you can imagine, in Afghanistan, in the middle of a war, it's not always the easiest thing to get calls out. So sometimes we would go and be preparing and waiting for the phone call, and it wouldn't come through. And then we'd have to come back each day until they were finally able to call in. And so that was difficult. That was probably a little unusual. The kidnap for ransom cases that I worked on were ones that were a little more protracted that way. But I had another negotiation that went 15 hours. It just really depends on the situation. That was someone that we had gone to arrest. He had barricaded himself after shooting at law enforcement to avoid being arrested. And he barricaded in his home for 15 hours. And so There's a lot of patience that come into that. Like I said, not only learning to manage yourself and the stress of that situation, but even everybody in your team. Because people at different times have different levels of stress and frustration, and how that can actually impact the negotiation that you're trying to do at that time is a very real thing in all of those situations.
Did you see any negotiators lose their cool during those kinds of situations?
Probably negotiators are probably a little bit better than the average bear in trying to manage their feelings. But like any team, right? As the stress builds, people respond to that differently. And so, yes, internally, I think we were probably very good professionally to not have that come out in our communications with the subject. But amongst ourselves as a team, there would be frustration. People having diverging thoughts of the approach that we're going to take. That also happened amongst, our negotiation team with the SWAT team. And sometimes the negotiation team and our tactical SWAT team, how we were communicating to our commanders about what we believed was the best approach, that sometimes could be in conflict, sometimes not, but really challenging for our commanders then to make a decision when you're getting such input and maybe diverging input about what is the best thing to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. So a negotiation on top of a negotiation.
Correct.
About how it's going to be handled.
Correct. And as exactly as you just beautifully said, that is the thing with negotiations, right? Sometimes there are multiple negotiation tables going on. So maybe you're in business and you think you're doing some high stakes negotiations for some big deal. but it's also how you work internally, the different departments and their input on the plan. It's each one of those is their own negotiations, and which is what I love about this topic and communication, because we all do it every day in all the ways. And so it's such an important skill to think about, to get better at. And so, yes, I saw it, in our kidnap for ransom negotiations. It's with the terrorist group, it's with the family, it's with our internal team. We're over here trying to also see if there could be maybe a military intervention. So you're kind of running multiple avenues down. And then there's always the outside input that you have no control over that impacts the negotiation too. So it was fun. I mean, it's very mentally stimulating to have all those things going on at the same time, but also stressful.
Yeah, definitely an adventure to be
Yeah.
a part of. And do you find that, those kinds of negotiations are quite similar to negotiations in the business world, or to me, it would seem that there would be a difference between how those would be handled. I'd love to understand from your perspective if there is a similar approach, or would you be taking a very different approach to someone that, when someone's life is at stake, right?
Yes, I recognize that. I hope most people's regular business day is not similar to my experience in the FBI doing crisis negotiations. And it was one thing when I was retiring from the FBI and getting into this space of professional development training that I worried, would my skills be transferable? And then what I realized is it is transferable, because we're all human beings, right? And maybe it's the level of crisis is different, but I absolutely know and I'm sure of that in business, some of these deals that people are working on, I mean, it might be dollars, but these are people's livelihoods, right? And there is a lot at stake and there is a lot of pressure. And I just think it's how we all manage that pressure. I don't know if it has to be that someone's life's on the line, because I do think there's application in all areas. I also jokingly say I'm a mother of 2 teenage daughters. And so I jokingly say I'm on the front lines of crisis negotiations, even though I'm retired from the FBI. But a lot of things that I trained and implemented in my negotiations with the Taliban are, I jokingly say, the same things I do with my teenagers. Because there are so many skills, because we're all dealing with human beings, that are applicable. And so I do believe there's a lot of similarities. I recognize the level of emotions may not be as intense, but I still think your understanding of that and the process, and to understand like the value of listening and gathering information and coming up with a really good like assessment of the other person, that applies in your personal life, your professional life, whatever you're working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly I can see how those skills would come in very useful with teenagers.
Yes. I'm not always winning, but I try hard.
Yeah. And, I do, find it fascinating that the way that we approach something can make 100% difference in the outcome, right? So I think how we are able to handle ourselves and evolve our skills in this is so, so important. That's why I'm really glad to have someone like yourself and really to share this knowledge, from experts, because it makes a tremendous difference. And now in the business world, there are very high stakes situations where, someone's crisis in their mind is definitely something that can be extremely difficult, right, for them, for their family, for the organization. And there's a lot of pressure as well. So I can see how that relates. And I'd love your take on, the general approach to negotiation. Like, is it really similar to, for example, what the courses at Harvard Business School teach, or is it different? What's at the bottom of, solid negotiation skills for you?
I love that question. Yes, I I do not have a Harvard degree. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I do have knowledge of the Harvard's negotiation program and what they teach and all the books that they write about it in general terms. I'm not an expert on that. But when I've learned that, there is such overlap with what we in the FBI train people and how I learned. I remember going to negotiation school and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know, like, how do you even begin? What do you say to someone that calls you and says, I need $1 million or we're killing your loved one? And I was so worried about just give me the perfect thing to say, right? I just have to know how to handle it technically. Mm-hmm. But one of the main things that they teach, it's really all about listening. Mm-hmm. And that when you listen, you have such an advantage to get those key pieces of information that you need to figure out the right strategy to solve it. I'm not saying there's not ever a technical component, and there are things to different types of negotiations that you should learn and understand the technical components in any negotiations. But the core basis of my training is something that the FBI does called the behavioral change stairway. Mm-hmm. And literally, if you think of it as a staircase, that very first step that you're going to take in any negotiation is active listening skills. Yeah. And so when I was in training and I was like, tell me what to say, they were like, we're going to teach you how to listen. And I was like, what? But what I learned over that, and then what I've learned in all my years in the FBI was that really is the key. Like, mm-hmm. people that are better listeners have such an advantage over people that don't, or that don't focus on it. And the advantage is if you can structure conversations to not be the first one to just spit all your position out and demand what you want, and really allow yourself, always remember your goals, always know what you're trying to do, what your plan is. But when you spend time and you let people talk and tell you what's going on for them and what's important to them, it is so much easier for you to figure out how to solve it. Mm. And so I think that works in anything, right? That works in your personal life. That works in your business negotiations at the highest stakes. We see it on the world stage in politics. If you had just listened and understand where someone's coming from, then you take what you need to do and your goals, and you can weave that together better. People will trust you better when they feel like they're heard and able to get their position out. And so that sort of, for the FBI model, but I believe that's also true in Harvard's model, right, is you need this baseline of understanding of what people truly care about and what they're really trying to actually negotiate, because it's not usually the first thing they lead with. Yeah. And, I love that you're sharing that, because certainly in our world, as an executive coach, we are, really learning through listening to understand how they can navigate through challenges and overcome these challenges. So there's a lot of overlap, it sounds like, in the type of conversation that's happening. And I do find that real quality listening tends to be undervalued. People want to be heard, and they don't always really know how to listen or invest that time in really listening and really understanding, making that effort to clarify and, deeply understand the other person. I find that with everyone being so busy, a lot of conversations are very surface level, very transactional. And that's something that really gets in the way of true communication and true collaboration being able to take place. I absolutely agree with you. That is my experience, that I think people are, like you said, it's undervalued and maybe underskilled.
Yes.
That sometimes people, I think, overestimate their ability to be a good listener. And I feel like I've tried to do it professionally, and I'm still trying. And I'm constantly reminded of how much our own minds kind of get in the way of that, and that we get distracted. And like you said, people are so busy. They just want to move and keep going. And you don't really hear. But if you take the time to really listen and key into the words that people use, the style of communication, it will tell you so much about them that will really help you to be able to message your side better, therefore to get your side listened to more, which is ultimately probably what you're trying to do anyway.
Yeah, and understanding the real needs, right? Because I remember there was that book about negotiation. I'm trying to remember the name of this book that I read years ago now, and I remember the example of really paying attention to the needs, because potentially you may not actually have the same needs, even though you're both wanting the same thing on the surface. And the negotiation is, I think that the example they were using was in the Middle East, where they were fighting over land. And in the end, the farmers wanted the land on the surface. And then there was a mining company that wanted access to the land underneath and what the resources in the land. So in the end, through that understanding, they were able to arrive at an agreement. But without understanding what someone really wants and paying attention to those details, that can be really difficult to get anywhere, right?
Right. And they're just fighting. You could fight to the death over, we want that land. We need that land. And you're right. Just that simple question of, what do you want to do with it? What is your plan? What are you looking at it for? Would reveal the simplest information that you're like, oh, we actually can work together. But you're right. If you're not open to hearing that or to know the right questions to ask, I'm sure as an executive coach, you probably have like great questions, because you can understand the importance of a question like that really brings out that information. That's critical piece of information you need for the agreement.
Yeah. And I find, really it's that dialogue, that willingness to just keep going deeper in that dialogue. And when we talk about skills, it's actually interesting because I do find equipping people with these skills is so important for them to now be able to navigate all of the change that's happening in the world, to help others also navigate that. Like if it's a leader working with people who are going through restructuring, right? There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of change, and these skills are essential. And so actually some of the work that I've been doing is helping equip leaders with coaching skills, the aspect of being able to really listen and get down to the needs, and then opening up the conversation further to clarify, to better understand, and then identify actions helps them so much to be able to handle change. Do you run courses for organizations on negotiation skills?
I work for a Canadian company called the Negotiations Collective. What I love about this group is we have very diverse backgrounds. There are other trainers just like myself who have this law enforcement crisis negotiation background. And we tend to do predominantly the conflict resolution communication part of it. But we also have trainers that are former diplomats and have been involved in these kind of very delicate negotiations and conversations. We have people that have been doing, millions and millions of dollar business deals and understand it from that perspective. We have higher education, government negotiations. And so what I love about our collective knowledge there is that we are able to be brought in by organizations, and whatever your industry, like you and I have already said, we all have these internal conflicts, challenges with difficult clients in the economy today, whether it's these deep negotiations that we're involved in. And it's really fun to be able to, we customize our trainings to be applicable to what you're working on. So we spend a lot of time talking to the team ahead of time to understand what their challenges are. We'll come in, we'll do a negotiation training, conflict resolution, communication, influence, all those kind of topics. And we've been really trying to work hard on that, making sure that teams are implementing what they're learning. And so if there's ways for us to be able to measure 30, 60, 90 days down the road, have you been able to take some of the things that you've learned in the training? Have you applied them? What kind of impact have you seen? Because I'm sure you know this with clients that you work with too, right? You can give a lot of great information. You can have these awesome conversations where you feel like, yes, and they're excited about what they're learning. But then when you go to do it, it can be a different story. And so it's so fun to kind of hear the impact where people are like, I actually did try it. And even if they're trying it in the low stakes where it's not as critically important, And then it becomes more natural for them. So then when they're actually asked to do it in the more higher stakes for whatever they're doing at that time, it just flows out easier. And it's one less thing to remember in the critical moments of a negotiation. It's one less thing to think about. How do I be a good listener? How do I implement this negotiation style or whatever it is? And it's so much easier than to focus on the technical parts that they would need to do for their jobs too.
And so how do you measure that? Like, how do you check in with people down the road? Is it a survey or?
They do it, like it's on the different end for me as a trainer, but they do it through some sort of surveys and measurements of like the skills. And our hope is that through our business development and our connections with the clients, that we are able to have like a really honest conversation, obviously confidential. It's not anything we share outside, but to really understand how it showed up for them in a specific negotiation and what they were negotiating on and how were they able to measure the impact of that, whether it's dollars or rates or, different parts of a contract that would be important to that client. Because much like we said before, some people care about different things depending on the industry.
Right. Okay. I'd love to go back to, to talking about the skills and hearing more about building trust, right? Because trust is such a key factor. And I know the listening is an important part of that. What else is essential to be able to build trust? And is it something that can be done faster if, is there a way to speed it up? Because, it can take time, I find, to build a relationship and establish trust. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, that's a great insight, right? Because I do think we all imagine that trust is something that's built over time. And that is absolutely true. But I was lucky to kind of get a glimpse into you can do it in these shorter relationships, right? I would be involved in negotiations. I would never know the person before, and I have not had a second conversation after to be able to have those opportunities to keep building on it. But just understand it's the same process, maybe just within a tighter window. And so the things you can do to kind of build trust with people, I always say, I think one of the main things is if you can kind of really, and again, it comes back to listening, but if you're really adjusting yourself to their worldview first, or always considering their worldview and the way that you're articulating that to show that you're considering them and you're considering yourself. I know everybody uses I think it's gotten a bad rap, the term empathy, right? And I think people think that that's kind of a soft skill or maybe a little too touchy-feely for some people. But I think there's really is a strategy to empathy, right? Because if I can show you that I am considering your side, I'm hearing you out, and I will speak my piece too, but we can have this real partnership relationship. We are lessening people's threats against us, their defensiveness against us. They'll be willing to share so much more. And so I think just by calibrating yourself to them. So in all my negotiations, obviously they're demanding something. So it's easy for me to just say, nothing else matters in this moment. I'm going to let you tell me what you need. Mm-hmm. But when I did that, there's always a resistance and a suspicion, obviously, as law enforcement trying to start a conversation. But when I really was able to just show, whether it was over minutes, hours, days, months, if you consistently do that and you're showing that you're considering them, you're honest, you do what you say you're going to do, that's how that trust builds. That's how their defensiveness lowers. Your good listening allows them to be willing to share more information from you. You just have to be really dialed in and focused on them. But when you do that, people really love it. Like they almost feel it in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think when that trust is built, when you kind of develop this rapport and connection with people, kind of as you're walking that staircase I mentioned before, the FBI staircase, that is part of it. Is the model shows when you're a really good listener and you display empathy, it builds rapport with people. And when you build that rapport and that connection with people, it's almost unusual. Mm-hmm. It feels different to people. And you are much more likely to get cooperation, to be influential over their behavior. And that is the pathway that I followed in all my negotiations because I saw it work over and over again.
Yeah.
Because emotions really can amplify. So if you're feeding into the wrong emotions, if you're matching anger with anger, if you're bringing competitiveness, you're going to get competitiveness. I think you have to be a little more sophisticated with your approach sometimes. I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for different approaches. I just want people to be more conscious and intentional of what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah. And I think, what always amazes me is that we can have one word like empathy, and yet people have very different ideas of what that actually means.
true.
Different emotions like associated with just one word, right? So one of the things I always really go down to basics with people to understand what's their understanding of
Yes.
a one word, because that
Love
can be so
that.
different, right? And so often I think empathy is misunderstood. I think that patience to get to know people, the desire, the curiosity
The desire. Yes.
has to be there, right? And then sometimes I have people tell me, "Oh, I'm not a people person," right? So they don't focus on those things. They don't really
Yeah.
care, and I think that costs them.
I agree with you. And I guess you don't have to be a people person. You don't have to care. Like that is your choice. Just know you are missing a big component to success, right? Because there's both. It's technical and personal, right? So there's great research, on all of this, whether it's Dr. Robert Cialdini's Pillars of Influence or it's Dr. Amy Cuddy's research on warmth and competency. People do care about those things. And so you can say, I'm not doing it. Just know you're missing something. Just know you are. Like you don't have all the information. You don't have all the areas that will allow you to be listened to more, to maybe get more, to be more influential because you're cutting off one part of it. So, but you would be a fantastic negotiator because your whole point about like really making people understand what do you think about that word? Like you're having a reaction to it. Some people, if you said the word empathy to me, I have a wonderful association with it. And so I'll feel that differently than someone else that's like, oh, you're telling me to be nice or to be soft. And like, so you asking fantastic questions like that to understand, what do you mean by that? Where did you come up with that belief about empathy? Then I can understand it better. And then maybe I can maybe we use a different word or something like that. But it's that kind of, like you said, that kind of detail, that level of listening to say, I'm really trying to understand everything you're saying, is what I think makes people fantastic listeners, negotiators, coaches, all that.
Yeah, and I found it interesting, because I've had clients come to me and say, I really want to be heard, right? I really want to develop my influence and have more of a voice. So when they've come in with this desire, what's been interesting is that just naturally the script got flipped to focusing on listening.
Good.
And yet that seems like the opposite of what they asked for.
But it's not. For you and I know it's not. Yes.
Right. Yes. And it's interesting because sometimes the perception of what we need is not always what we actually need, right? So I'm curious, when you're having these conversations with people to understand their needs, do you find that people know what they need, or do you have to dig deeper with them to get that understanding?
I guess like any good negotiator, I would say it depends on the person. I do think some people are more naturally self-aware of what they're doing. They're more open to the conversation, the questions. They've let their minds be more like flexible to consider other things. And then I've absolutely talked to people that are so locked in. I'm absolutely right. You can never convince me of anything different. Okay. But then I guess I would ask, in your world, right? Why are you here? Well, I want to be more influential. I want more. I want people to listen to me. And I think, like you said, if you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. Because like that model I told you, they'll feel heard, they'll feel connected to you. Then they will open up and share more with you, right? And then you'll have more information to be more strategic, to be more influential, all those good things. But people have no patience. And, so it's hard for people to slow down a little bit. I think they always think there's going to be, I'll have people all the time ask me, like, what's the tip or trick? What's the one thing? There isn't one thing. There isn't a perfect tip or trick, because I really want you to like absorb this at a cellular level. Mm-hmm. That you have this, you said, genuine curiosity and interest in learning about other people. When you have that internally, people will feel it. Mm-hmm. And people will have different conversations with you. So it really is on the listener. I have a friend that has this wonderful quote that says, the way you listen is how the story is told.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly it. Like, there is a level of responsibility on your skill level of listening to, if you get all the nuance, get all the detail, get the parts of the story that someone's not telling you. Like, are we digging deep enough to see what your actual need is? That only comes out if you're a better listener.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so when you do have people that are convinced that they're right and their way is the only way, and I'm asking this because I work a lot in the world of tech, and I often have worked with engineering leaders who work with a lot of engineers who feel like their way is the way, right? And then especially if they're working across different cultures, different countries. So I've had several heads of engineering who are working, as a regional leader, that this is something that they struggle with, right? Because people want to do it their way. And so both in terms of their approach, as well as, it seems like certain cultures are more reluctant to be sort of told what to do. Yeah. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. If somebody is in this mindset of, I'm right, there's no other way, what do you do?
Yeah, I think you hit on one point of like, people don't like to be told what to do. I agree with that. I think that is like a human need for all of us, is this autonomy to come up with things on our own. I guess the biggest thing that stands out to me as I was hearing you talk, and I've done a lot of work, actually had just come back from giving a keynote talk to a room full of engineers. And I'm sure there were absolutely some people in that room that thought, I have no idea what she's talking about. And I have no interest. But I walked in thinking, I don't know that they'll be as interested in this. And I was so surprised by how many people are like, we need this. We don't like to deal with the feeling part of it. And so for me, what I try to do in my presentation to engineers and people like that is if I can bring it more to take it out of this nebulous world of emotions, right? And that building in more of a predictable model to just be data that you can understand. So if I can teach you how people typically respond, it's just a piece of information that and that you can put in a place. You can build it in. You don't have to then have your own emotional reaction, because I think sometimes engineers are like, I don't do feelings and I don't like that someone gets emotional. It's like, but that's an emotion too.
Yes.
Right? But it's just the opposite emotion. And so I'm always trying to make people, or like help people understand how similar they are, even if it appears to be in completely different camps. Yeah. And if you can build sort of that similarity, that connection, that acknowledgement, agreement, it just makes it so much easier to connect. And that's what we're all really trying to do, because then ultimately, I do believe when we have that better connection, we move faster in conflict, in decision-making, in business. And so as much as you're like, you want to just come in and tell people what to do because you're so busy and don't have time, if you're that like force of will pushing everybody, it can work in the short term, which is, it tricks you to think that you were successful. But a lot of times that personality style over time or further into a project can back up on you It ends up costing you more time at the end. But I
Yes.
don't know that people calculate that over the whole time. And they think they moved fast in the beginning, so it felt like they moved fast. But here
Yeah.
you are 6 months, 6 years into a project, and people are not as bought in as you thought. And now you're having team breakdowns and issues. Or your
Yeah.
level of influence is lessened because you railroaded people and didn't let them be part of the process.
Yeah.
So
It's such a
that
common
it's
uh,
hard. It's hard.
issue. And I think that is a huge cost to organizations. And, certainly I've seen some of the organizations addressing that and looking at having more consistency as far as leadership style goes, right? To have more of a collaborative leadership style. Sometimes we do need fast decisions to be made, certainly, right?
Yes.
Mhm. And it can be challenging sometimes to know what to do, right? With all the change.
And when's the line to finally say, hey, it's great to have everybody sharing their feelings or opinions, but like we have to make a decision. But your communication of that, your reasoning for things, like explaining yourself does go a long way. Or saying, hey, I would love your input in this situation. And here's my reasons why this situation, we have to move fast. We have to just go forward. But please know, I would want your input. I do need it, but in this situation and then at least people understand what you're trying to do, and that more times than not, you are considering them. They'll let you go, when you need to.
Yeah. 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 And I love that, you mentioned the emotions part, because I think that often they aren't really considered, and yet they do play a part for sure in how people react to a leader. And I think that so much talent and energy is lost because of poor leadership. Like, that's one of the reasons I ended up working in this field to help leaders be more effective and to be able to bring out that talent. And I think that, what you've shared is so important, because especially with certain cultures, with certain functions, they're just not used to talking about any of this, right? And so it often kind of goes in the back of the mind. And then they wonder, well, why is this not working? Why are people not coming along with me?
Yeah. The
Right?
cultural thing is a real thing. And that's part of the strategic assessment I want anybody to make of any culture that you're in, right? The way I communicated in my negotiations with a criminal drug gang that took a rival drug dealer's mother is very different than a negotiation I'm having over here with the Taliban. We talk about different things. The pace is different. My language is different. And so whether it's culture of you're from this country and culturally your group does it like this, or whether it's an internal organizational culture, you do have to study that and understand it. And so you may be able to do things faster in certain cultures than others. But I still believe that even in the cultures that are resistant to it, I just think you need to understand it might be a slower burn and you need to be patient. But every interaction kind of can build to you sort of setting yourself as someone that people can come to and talk to and that you'll consider, and people will feel it about you. Maybe they don't know how to define it because culturally they don't talk about it as much, but I still think the human element impacts in your ability to be successful within that culture.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about these different approaches that you had, like with these two scenarios that you shared. Can you share more about each of these to help us understand how you decided, to use different strategies and what was different?
Yeah, I think I spent years in the FBI, like specialty training, and had spent some years working undercover. And I feel like that taught me so much about, again, listening is important, but that you can really shape your environment, yourself. There are so many things you can use to make yourself the most appealing to whomever you're trying to engage with. And I think sometimes people just say, I'm just this way and this is how I do it. And you either get it or you don't. But I think being forced into some of these situations where you had to adjust because it was important enough for you to be successful, it taught me that you really can change. So I could, depending on who I'm talking to, my language would sound different, because if I hear from you what you want to talk about, how you talk about, and if I can shift to have conversations around that, then you're more likely to listen to me. Mm-hmm. But if you're using a lot of curse words and violent language and things like that, and I'm coming to talk to you in this super professional tone, it's not matching. Right. So we kind of have to match. Now, I'm not saying I need to come in and act like I'm something I'm not, but I have to bring my authentic self, but like calibrated to you. Mm-hmm. And I always give this joking example in my training that my husband is he was an infantry Marine officer in the Marine Corps. He then went into the FBI and was in a leadership role, kind of got higher up in a leadership role. He communicates very differently than I do. And one time he's having a little silly argument with our daughter. She had to go out to like a sports practice early in the morning and she's complaining because it was cold and she didn't want to go. And he's talking as the parent that's like, you have to be committed and a good team member and you got to do. And I said to him, which was wrong on my part, is I said to him, hon, surrender to this conversation. He lost his mind and he was like, I'll never surrender. But for me, I should not have used the word surrender with an infantry Marine officer. Like that's not it. I know him too well to have used that word. But if he used that word on me, it would have a much different meaning. Mm-hmm. And what I really meant was all you have to do to say to her is, you're right, it's really early and it's really cold. Let's bring a jacket and here we go. Let's embrace this miserableness together. And it would have been done. And they would have walked out the door. She wasn't saying, I'm not going. She just wanted to have a moment to share her frustrations and all of that. And so it's just like acknowledging it. You don't have to agree with it. You just acknowledge it. And it moved it along so much faster. But but that different approach that's probably not the right approach that I took to him, right? I should have taken that. And I tried to bring that level of conversation to whomever I was dealing with in an undercover role or a negotiation role, because people want to be communicated with in the style they know, right? Yeah. And you can gather that. When you listen to people, you can gather the way that they talk about things. So.
Yeah, and it can be all too easy to take a shortcut or think we're taking a shortcut, especially when it comes to family. Yes. And then it
I thought I was taking a shortcut, but I didn't. I only made it worse. Yeah, I escalated when I thought I was de-escalating.
Yeah. And so with the Taliban, how did you have to be? How I'm really curious and trying to picture you and how different you would be from how you are now.
So that conversation had a unique approach, right? So the hostage takers, were communicating through the wife. So they were thinking they were talking to her, and we were coaching her in how to have the communication. They didn't know that we were present.
Oh, wow.
And then that case took an even unique perspective where the hostage takers spoke a dialect that she did not speak. She spoke another dialect of that country. And so they were having challenge and couldn't communicate. Wow. So they end up putting her husband on the phone to communicate his own ransom payment and release logistics through his wife. So could you imagine, I don't know your life story, but having to communicate with your partner or someone to have that familial relationship with, and you're having this very challenging negotiation with each other.
Tough. Yeah. Wow. That's very complicated.
It was, that's a whole different level. And so those are the hard parts of like that conversation is, so not only do I have to figure out the way to communicate with her to make her comfortable and to have the strategy that she's going to implement, she's working through her own feelings. She communicates And so we structure our conversation one way to the hostage takers, but then we have to adjust because she has to adjust her language to be to her husband. So he doesn't, because he knows the way she communicates. So if she's communicating vastly different than she normally does, he would know something was going on. And so that one was complicated because it had a lot of sort of extra layers to it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And so that was it was successful, right? That was the one that you said that you were able to succeed with that and have the hostage released, right?
So interestingly, like I said, we always are working kind of multiple avenues, right? Mm-hmm. So as we're having conversations about paying a ransom payment, we are also having conversations with the military about potentially doing a rescue, all the while worrying about any other outlier that could just happen because in the middle of a war, he's in a country that is under attack. What ended up happening was we were able to get the military to do a rescue of him at the time. So yes, successful in the sense that he was rescued and brought back from that incident, but they didn't have to pay a ransom payment at that time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And what about with the gang members that you mentioned now? How is that a different strategy?
So very different. They were asking for different things. They were adjusting over time. And in any good negotiation, as time goes, it manages expectations, usually lessens expectations the longer that it's taking. And so that was part of it. Strangely enough, so again, these things can go in any direction. As they were coming to deliver the victim in exchange for payment, they got into a car accident. And it was a serious enough car accident that they then ran off because they knew the police were going to come, and they left the victim in the car. And so we were able to rescue her without any issue.
Wow.
But that's not the way we thought that was going to go at all. Yeah. Because we thought it was going to go with the drop of the money and the exchange. But strangely enough,
one of the biggest life lessons, right, is to expect the unexpected to happen.
You never know. Yes. In good ways and bad ways. Right.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, the experience that you've shared, I can see how that would be so hard to stay, to really manage your mindset through all of these moments and twists and turns that these situations can take. That takes a lot of strength. And I appreciate you sharing with us, your experience. Is there any final piece that you would really like to share to, for the audience to be able to reflect on?
I think, I guess I've said it once before, but I really do believe, that responsibility of being a good listener, take it seriously, because the way you listen, like my friend says, the way you listen is how that story will be told. And so if you want that information, if you want those key pieces to be the most successful, you have to be open, available, engaged, and asking those awesome questions that you had talked about to really understand what people mean. Because it's so easy to say, I'm this kind of person. I am a good listener. I am successful. I am influential, all those things. But you can't just declare that, right? You can't just declare your reputation, your brand, whatever. It's something you have to demonstrate at every interaction that you have with people. So I always say on a regular Wednesday, the way that you're talking to people and engage with people will show up and impact when you're in that hard negotiation, that difficult conversation. And so please take it seriously all the time. Please engage with people in the lower stakes, because it'll be so much easier when you're in that higher stakes, when you've practiced all this stuff, keeping yourself calm, being a good listener, kind of building that stairway to influence. It's not something you do in that moment, right? There's so many more steps to it.
It's certainly a practice, right? And I think that definitely what I've noticed is over a period of time, you just have these questions show up in your mind, and you really become comfortable with being that way. It really is a way of being rather than a way of becoming in a moment a great question asker, right? It's something that you cultivate as a skill, right? Like you would cultivate a garden. You don't know everything at the beginning.
Or that you cultivate as an engineer, that you go through additional technical training so you understand all the nuance of that specific industry that you're in. Why would you not do that for the human element, the personal element of that?
Yeah. And that's one of the things I find, just being able to talk about each different scenario and explore that scenario really helps with implementation, and being able to then pull that skill set out and have it in your tool belt, right, so to speak, ready to go, rather than, getting all nervous in that moment about how to behave. Then you already start to feel like you know how to do that. So I think, as you share, like the courses are one thing, but actually going and practicing it in real life as soon as you possibly can after a course. That's what really helps to build the skills.
And thankfully, we all have so many opportunities to engage with people, to talk to people, that there are multiple times in your day you can practice, but you got to be willing to.
That's right. Yeah. It's about making the most of those opportunities and taking that time to do it, because ultimately it saves time in the long run.
It does. It absolutely does. And people will learn that when they practice. They'll see it better. Then you're more committed to the practice when you realize the benefit of it. So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Melissa. I've really appreciated you being our guest today and, sharing your wealth of knowledge.
Happy to. I really enjoyed our conversation. You've given me great questions to now think of, so I'll have to use some of those in my work too. So I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure.